Chapter 11. Let me get that. AJ reached out for the carry-on bag Lisa had on her shoulder as they followed Jeff to the line in the airport. I can get it, she said, but his hand stayed on the strap. Let him have it, Eve said from Lisa's side. It'll make him feel important. Yeah, AJ agreed with a grin. Otherwise, what's the use of having me around? For a second, Lisa held the bag, and then she relinquished it to his care. He took it, shouldered it, and looked around the airport as the three of them joined their leader. I wonder where Gabe and Ash are, Jeff said, looking at his watch through the sunglasses he hadn't had enough hands to take off. Besides the sunglasses, he looked like a pack animal. They were supposed to be here. They'll be here. Lisa shifted her weight awkwardly. Gabe probably lost his goggles or something. Or something, Eve said with a laugh. Jeff looked at his watch again as the black leather of his jacket slipped over the white button-down shirt. Well, I hope they get here soon. They'll be here, Lisa assured him as she attempted to reach down to readjust her shoe. These shoes are killing me. Why'd you wear them then? Eve asked. Because my boots don't fit anymore. Nothing fits anymore. Just think, 5 more weeks and you'll be able to wear whatever you want, Eve said. Could we make those 5 weeks go a little faster? Lisa asked as they all inched forward in the line. Let's not, Jeff said seriously. A little nervous, are we? AJ asked Jeff as he tilted his head playfully under the backward black New York Yankees hat he wore. Nervous? I wouldn't say that, Jeff said. Petrified would be much closer. Eve laughed. Now's not a good time to decide that. Who decided? Jeff asked, moving 2 suitcases forward and kicking at the other one. She said, I'm pregnant, and I passed out. Both AJ and Eve laughed, but Lisa shook her head seriously. He's not kidding. Hey, guys, a voice called from behind them, and all 4 gazes turned to it. Well, we were beginning to think you all chickened out on us, Jeff said, extending his hand to Gabe. However, Gabe's normally quick comeback didn't come. Bad news, Gabe said, and Eve noticed that Ashley wasn't with him. Where's Ash? Lisa asked. Her mom had a heart attack last night, Gabe said. It was slight, but Ash is with her right now. Oh no, Lisa said. Is she all right? Jeff asked. They think she's going to be fine, but they're going to do a few tests today to find out what went wrong. Gabe's face fell even further. So, I guess that means we're out. Crud, Jeff said, and he sighed, letting a carry-on slide off his shoulder. Well, I guess that means the trip's off. No, hey. Gabe held up a hand. You guys go. I brought you the key and some directions. We can't go without you guys, Lisa said. Ashley insisted, Gabe said. She said to go and ski a run for her. Lisa looked at Jeff, who looked back at her with concern and uncertainty. Neither Eve nor AJ said a word. This decision wasn't up to them, and they knew it. It'll be the last time you guys get to go without bottles and diapers and pacifiers for who knows how long, Gabe coaxed. Call it our early baby present. I don't know, Lisa said. It doesn't seem right to go without you. Ashley will be crushed if you don't, Gabe said, pulling the stuff out of his pocket. You've got your tickets. The place is yours until next weekend if you decide you don't want to come back. He held the items and smiled at Jeff. Except you, mister. You better be on that truck Tuesday morning, or you'll be on KP duty for a month. Gabe put the stuff in Jeff's hands. Have fun, and ski a couple runs for us. Tell Ashley we'll be praying for her and her mom, Eve said. Gabe smiled at her. I will. Have a safe flight. The 4 of them waved as he turned back for the door. I hope Ashley's okay, Lisa said as the ticket clerk called them forward. Me too, Eve agreed as Jeff stepped up to the counter. New Mexico, AJ said, settling into his seat next to Eve and across the aisle from Jeff and Lisa. I've never been to New Mexico. Mexico, yes. New Mexico, no. You've been to Mexico? Eve asked, surprised by every single thing she learned about him. Juarez, he said. Once for like half an hour. We went to El Paso for this school trip. It was fun until 2 of the guys got busted for trying to smuggle alcohol back across. 2 guys, huh? And one of them's name wasn't Knight, was it? He slid another 2 inches down in the seat. Nope, I was a good boy. All I wanted was a knife that had a hollowed-out handle. A hollowed-out handle? What good does that do? Eve asked skeptically. You put the alcohol in the handle, and you put the knife in your pocket, Jeff said from across the aisle. 2 birds with 1 stone. Lisa jabbed Jeff. And how would you know that? People talk. I listen, he said, shrugging innocently. Eve's eyes widened in disbelief. And you wanted one? AJ shrugged. I was 16. You want a lot of dumb things when you're 16. So, did you get it? No, the chaperone guy wouldn't let me. Huh, smart chaperone, Eve said. Tell me about it. My mom would have flipped out. And the fact that you were going to wig your mother out never crossed your mind while you were thinking about purchasing this double-edged sword? I just thought it looked cool. Well, remind me what cool means to you the next time we're shopping. AJ smiled at her as the plane taxied to the runway. I'll be sure to do that. What do you think? 2 cars or 1? Jeff asked AJ when they were standing in line for the rental counter. The women had decided to find a nice place to sit down and guard the luggage. I don't know. How are we planning on doing this anyway? AJ asked. Well, I had thought we'd go skiing one day and the girls would go the next, but that's not going to work. And I don't want to leave Lisa at the cabin without a vehicle. AJ shrugged. Then I guess we take 2. Okay, 2 it is. Eve wasn't exactly sure how the car thing had happened, but suddenly she was sitting in the passenger seat of a Dodge Ram pickup, watching AJ, who was sitting next to her, pull out of the Albuquerque airport as he followed Jeff in a little blue Camry. I just love the mountains, Eve said as she put her head back on the headrest and gazed out at the white, snow-capped mountains in the distance. It's all so fresh and clean and new up here. His glance over was only that. So you've been skiing then? Oh, yeah. We went on spring break right after Dustin and I got together. He spent the whole day pulling me out of the snow. I don't think I even got off the lift without falling that day. She shook her head. It was awful. But then the next day, I stopped being like, ah, every time the skis started sliding. I did better that day. We went a couple times since then. Well, at least you had someone to help you. I had 6 guys going, Hey, AJ, there's a jump. Come on, man, go for it. Terror jumped to Eve's heart. A jump? It was really this little incline out of the snow, but it was enough to get you airborne. Her eyebrows reached for the ceiling as her head came off the headrest, and her gaze drilled into him. You didn't jump it, did you? Sure I did, he said with a shrug. I had to. They were all sitting there watching me. Besides, they dared me to, and I couldn't go back on a dare. She laughed and let her head settle again. On your first day you were ski jumping? It was strange how wonderful it was to simply be able to sit and look at him. Well, I wouldn't exactly call it ski jumping. It was more like ski crashing. But hey, I tried it. You are crazy. Eve shook her head and looked out the window, feeling all the tension from the trip drop away from her. Okay, she said, turning back to him. What's the dumbest thing you've ever done on skis? He looked over at her skeptically. You don't want to know. Yes, I do. Turning, she pulled her knee onto the seat between them. What's the one thing that to this minute you really cannot believe you did? His gaze squeezed into total uncertainty, and he shook his head. You're going to think I'm insane. I already think that. Come on, what is it? With one more, I really wish you would just drop this topic glance, he sighed. I skied down the entire hill with a beer in my hand. She looked at him questioningly. That's not so bad. Buck naked. Her eyes widened in shock, and she collapsed, laughing. Oh no, you're kidding, right? Like I would tell you something like that and be kidding, he said as just under his cap flushed red. Why would you do that? He shrugged, and together they both said, They dared me to. Every time she tried to stop laughing, the giggles would hit her again and she doubled over. He looked over at her and laughed. I can't ski Copper Mountain anymore. I wonder why. Oh, that's awful. No, they wanted me to go down a black diamond like that, but there are some things you have to draw the line about. Her hand came up to her forehead as she tried to stop the laughing. I cannot believe you would do something like that. I don't think they believed it either. They didn't dare me much after that. Can you blame them? I tried to, but the ski patrol wasn't exactly interested in my motivation. I can imagine. So that's my one dumbest thing on skis, he said. What's yours? Oh man, I don't have anything close to that. Yeah, but surely there's something you did that wasn't exactly brilliant. She ducked her head and 2 strands of hair fell across her face as one image jumped into her head. With a push, she strung the hair behind her ear. I knocked the ski pole rack down in the rental place. How'd you manage that? Well, I didn't exactly realize how long the skis were, and the guy put them on me and left to go get the phone or something. My ear cover thing was on the chair, and I was afraid I was going to forget it, so they really shouldn't put those racks in the middle of the store. Big mess? Yeah, you could say that. Where was Dustin? There was only the smallest of pangs. I don't remember. All I remember is that was the first time of the next 100,000 that he picked me up that day. Let me tell you, those poles are a lot harder than they look. AJ laughed softly. I can see you laying in the middle of these hundreds of poles. Dustin, help! Sheepishness crept over her. Oh, yeah, and I was trying to act all cool and everything, too. We'd only gone out like a few times at that point. He must have thought, well, hello, Miss Grace. His glance sideways at her made the center of her heart do strange things. Funny, you don't look clumsy. She rolled her eyes. Oh, brother. You don't know me very well, then. Once I get it, I'm fine. Like rollerblading, that's cool. But if I've never done it before, look out. Instantly, he was interested. You rollerblade? I love it, almost as much as skiing now. So you got over the point? Heck, by the 3rd day, I could even stand up off the ski lift. Impressive. Okay, granted you were probably doing black diamonds by the 3rd day. 2nd, he corrected. She looked at him in amazement. Are you afraid of anything? Haven't found it yet, he said. Yeah, I noticed. Nothing about her thought that was frightening. Somehow it was comforting to know he wasn't afraid of the booze in the night. Does Jeff know what he's gotten himself into? AJ raised his eyebrows wickedly. I'm not telling him, are you? Hey, he deserves everything he gets if he goes skiing with you. The twists and turns through the mountain pass were enough to make her mortally queasy. Are we almost there? Eve asked as AJ took one sharp turn banked by a drop-off on one side and solid rock on the other. How am I supposed to know? Do I look like I have a map? You don't know where we're going? I didn't think to look at the map, but that's okay. All we've got to do is keep up with them and we'll be fine. Oh, yeah, all we've got to do. Does he know where we're going? I sure hope so. Eve pulled at the neck of her oversized off-white sweater. She had brought half her closet, but she wasn't sure if she would have enough clothes to survive a whole night in a lost pickup. Thinking that discussing what happened if they got separated might send her anxiety mechanism into overdrive, she searched for something else to talk about. Okay, how about this one? Pickups or cars? Define cars. Sports cars. Define pickups. She really didn't have much expertise in that area. This one. Probably sports cars. They really handle curves well. Huh, that would be nice about now. The acceleration of the pickup increased past her comfort level. You know that speed limit sign said 35. He looked down at the speedometer, which read 30. Oh, good, he said, pushing the pedal to the floor. No, no! She tapped one foot on the floor to keep her nerves inside her body. Okay, I'll shut up now. With one glance over at her, he slowed down and said, M&Ms or Crunch Bar? M&Ms. Brown or green? Brown. Isn't that funny? He asked, shifting the position of his leg. They're the very same except for the outside color. But they wouldn't be half as much fun without the colors. She took her mind and gaze off the road as they rounded another sharp corner. If you could come up with a new color for M&Ms, what would it be? Purple. Why? I don't know. I like purple, I guess. Purple? Is that your favorite color? She asked. I don't really have a favorite color. I like black and red and blue. And purple? I like whatever's clean. And if nothing's clean? He glanced over at her. Then whatever doesn't smell. Good plan. At that moment ahead of them, the Camry slowed and turned left off the highway just in front of 3 large boulders. The gravel road it took didn't look exactly inviting, but AJ turned, and they bumped their way up the first 10 yards. Did Ashley mention how far from nowhere this place was? Eve asked as the highway disappeared into the trees behind them. I don't remember anyone asking that question, AJ said. I just hope Jeff knows where he's going, or we're going to wind up in somebody's lake. There's a nice thought. The pickup was in a steady uphill climb, and Eve finally leaned back into the seat to keep her stomach with her. I sure hope Lisa's okay. That makes 2 of us. At a bend in the road, the taillights of the Camry came on for a moment, and then it veered off to the right. A little way up that road, back in the midst of the tall pine trees looming in all directions, sat a cabin. AJ waited a half-second before he turned the pickup and followed Jeff to the path on the side of the road. There was a driveway, but it was stacked 3 feet in snow and thus inaccessible. When the vehicle came to a stop, Eve took a solid breath. She reached for her door handle and stepped out into the crisp, late afternoon air. It smelled just like she remembered. Ahead of them, Jeff got out and stretched his back. That was fun, huh? He called to Eve. Fun isn't the word I would use, she said as she walked over to Lisa's door. When the door popped open, Eve offered her friend a hand up. Careful, it might be a little slick. Okay, Lisa said, pulling up, watching for ice, and looking around at her new surroundings all at the same time. Okay, now I'm glad we came. I'm hoping someone thought to bring a snow shovel, AJ said from where he had just slammed the pickup door. This isn't exactly valet parking. Gabe's notes say there's one in the garage, Jeff said, swinging out of stand-and-stretch mode into let's get serious about how we're getting inside mode. You up for a little exercise? Ready when you are, AJ replied. Jeff grabbed the key and the instructions from the dashboard of the Camry, and as the women stood at the car and watched, the men crunched their way through the snow. At places, their feet slipped through farther than they had realized, nearly pulling them all the way to the ground. Crashing into each other while trying to maintain balance, they made their way through the snow. When they finally reached the cabin steps, both of them had snow up to the knees of their pant legs. This is the right cabin, isn't it? AJ asked, looking around from his new vantage point. Let's hope so. Jeff worked the key for a second, and the door slid open. Presto! They disappeared into the cabin. How long do you think this is going to take? Lisa asked as she wrapped her arms around herself. Long enough to know we should get back in the car, Eve said. She helped Lisa back in and walked carefully around the back to the driver's door. Once inside, she waited, watching the cabin for movement. So you survived the ride? I was beginning to wonder on a couple of those turns, Lisa said. How did you guys do? Good, Eve said, thinking back to the skiing stories. Lisa looked at her but didn't ask the question in her eyes. At that moment, AJ appeared on the deck with the shovel. Ah, our white knight has arrived, Eve said with a smile. He's our white knight? Lisa asked teasingly. Oh boy, are we in trouble. If she only knew, Eve thought, watching him. If she only knew. Almost an hour of hard work later, the path to the cabin was cleared, and all 4 of them had made it inside with luggage. It's colder in here than it is outside, Eve said, shivering for emphasis. We turned up the heat, Jeff said. It'll take a while. The men transferred the luggage to the 3 bedrooms as Lisa and Eve searched through the cabinets, trying to determine what they would need when they went to the little grocery store they had passed in town what seemed like hours before. "We're going out to turn on the water," Jeff said, crossing through the living room to the bedroom AJ had disappeared into. "Okay," Lisa said. Then she looked at Eve. "I think our first problem is what to eat tonight." "That'd be a good place to start." "Is Gabe always this organized?" AJ asked in surprise. Everything, right down to the hiding place of the flashlight, was exactly where it said it would be in the notes. "Him or Ashley," Jeff said as the 2 of them walked through the musty underbelly of the house to the water valve. "Ashley," AJ said. "I don't know. You might be surprised," Jeff said. "People aren't always what they seem at first." At the valve, Jeff turned, and it took 2 good jerks to get the valve unstuck. When that was finished, he turned to AJ. "All systems go." "I guess we're going to have to drive back into town," Jeff said, clearly not excited about that idea as he stood in the kitchen minutes later. "We should have stopped on the way through," Eve said. "Yeah, but who knew we'd be stuck in the middle of nowhere?" Lisa said, and she winced and shifted position in the little stool at the bar. "I can go," AJ said, and the 3 others looked at him. "What? I've bought groceries before." "Yeah, but how are your navigational skills?" Jeff asked, not entirely teasing. AJ shrugged. "They let me drive the ambulance." "The man's got a point," Eve said. "Tell you what, we'll go in and get the stuff. You guys take it easy for a while. Lisa, you put your feet up, and Jeff, you make sure she does." "We won't be long," AJ said as he grabbed the list from the counter. Back in the pickup, Eve wondered about her sanity. The sunlight was fading behind the mountain, and the temperature had dropped since their last foray outside. "It's a pretty nice place," AJ said as he turned the pickup around on the road that was too small for the large vehicle frame. "Once it gets warm and livable," Eve said. "Wait until you get to those slopes." "That's what I keep telling myself." They bounced out to the highway in silence as Eve tried to figure out how he knew the way so easily. She was sure if it was her, they would have ended up in Arizona by the time she realized it was the wrong direction. "Scale of 1 to 10, how good of a skier are you?" AJ asked. 1 is what? "Can't get off the lifts without falling down." 10 is what? He smiled at her. "Me, of course." She shook her head incredulously. 10.5. I am better than you, but I don't do moguls, black diamonds, or ski jumps." "Bowls?" "Or bowls," she corrected herself. 10.5 on blues and greens," he shrugged. "Not bad." "I'm sure you'll be bored silly with me." He glanced over at her, and his smile lit his eyes. Not likely. It was official. Eve couldn't have made it back to the cabin if her life had depended on it. Twists and turns and curves and inclines, they were enough to make her think that she couldn't even ride the trail, much less drive it. "You okay?" AJ asked with some concern as they crossed past the 3 boulders and lurched across the potholes leading to the final turn. "We're almost there?" "Almost." Good. Pitch blackness surrounded the pickup beyond the headlights, so that all she could see was directly in front of them. "You think they're worried about us yet?" "I doubt it. Jeff, Lisa alone, cabin off in the woods. You do the math." "True," she said, although that didn't make her feel exactly comforted. He rounded the last corner, and the lights of the cabin came into view. Well, at least they left a light on. The pickup stopped behind the Camry, and he killed the engine. Eve crawled out and shivered at the onslaught of the chill, even through the parka that was now standard with her outfit. Quickly, she grabbed 2 bags and headed down the little trail. Before she even got to the steps, he was right with her. "Careful, the steps might be slick," he said, bracing his body behind hers lest she not negotiate the steps successfully. At the door, she slid it open and stepped inside, grateful for the warmth. Jeff sat on the couch reading, but he looked up at the sound. "We're home," AJ sang out. "Shh," Jeff said, standing quickly and striding over to take the bags from Eve. "Lisa's resting." "Is she okay?" Eve asked, not totally liking the tiny note of concern she heard in Jeff's voice. She's fine, just a little tired from the trip. He set the bags on the counter. So what'd you get? After the dishes were cleaned, Jeff and Lisa decided that bed sounded better than socializing, and they excused themselves and retired to the large bedroom off to one side of the cabin. Party poopers, AJ said, collapsing onto the sofa and grabbing the remote. Do you blame them? Eve asked as she sat carefully on the other side. He smiled. No. Slowly, he flipped through the channels until with only 4 flips, they were back to where they started. Ah, simplicity, he said sarcastically. On her side, Eve yawned and pulled one of the pillows from the couch so she could hold it to her chest. We've got a shoot-'em-up show, he said as he flipped again through the channels. News, another shoot-'em-up show, or... Although the next picture was dark, the sounds emanating from it clearly announced what that show was about. AJ tilted his head curiously and arched an eyebrow. This could be interesting. Give me that, Eve said in annoyance. She swiped the remote from his hand and hit the power button. How about we talk? Talk? He asked wide-eyed. About what? About you. Me? His eyebrows arched further, and then his face dropped in mischief as he ratcheted himself lower on the couch. What do you want to know? Besides skiing, what do you like to do? Play the drums. Okay, besides play the drums and ski, what do you like to do? He narrowed his gaze thoughtfully. Eat. With one swipe, she whacked him on the top of the head with a pillow. Besides that, ding-dong. Instantly, his hands went over his head as if for protection, but the attack was already over. Geez, I didn't know I was being interrogated. Wait till you see what I've got planned next, she said seriously. He looked at her with skeptical fear. I don't think I want to. You're right, you don't. Now answer the question. What do I like to do? He resumed his former position on the couch. I don't sing, and I don't dance very well, but I like the clubs as long as I'm not supposed to be impressing the girl I'm with. I like to play cards, but I lose more money than I ever win. He shrugged. I don't know. Mostly I like to hang out or do stuff I've never done before. Like what? His eyes lit from a spark inside him. Ski diving. I'd love to do that sometime. Bungee jumping. I almost got to do that once, but the guy who said he'd do it if I would backed out on me. Fly a plane, surf, go scuba diving, rock diving, swim with the dolphins, climb Mount Everest. Climb Mount Everest? Are you serious? Slowly his head rolled to the side until he was gazing at her. No, probably not, but I think it sounds like fun. She shook her head in bewilderment. You're unbelievable, you know that? Why? He asked, looking over at her. What would you like to do? Not climb Mount Everest, that's for sure. The gold of his eyes softened as his gaze burrowed through her. Well, what's your Everest? She thought for a moment, her mind sliding through doors she had thought had long since been slammed shut. Water skiing. Interest burst into his eyes. No kidding? I love to water ski. You would, she said with a slight note of fear in the back of her voice. He sat up and spun a knee around to face her. You know what's really cool? In fear, she shook her head. Wakeboarding. Oh man, that's the ultimate. What does that entail? It's like snowboarding, except you're on the water. On the water? Yeah, you've got this board and it's strapped to your feet. You jump up in the air and flip around and hopefully land upright. It's just so awesome. He spun around so that his back was on the couch again as he reveled in the memories. You'd love it. Eve's gaze dropped to the pillow in her hands. She had seen 2 opportunities to water ski pass her up. More to the point, she had forced them to pass her up as she sat in the boat saying, No, I don't want to. Truth was, she did want to, but fear of either crashing or totally humiliating herself, or both, took her desire right out of the game. It must be nice to have so much courage. His gaze chanced on her again. It's a choice, he shrugged. You make the choice, the courage will come. Softly she smiled, thinking that she wished it was so easy. Suddenly, he yawned and stretched his arms high above his head so that the arm of his basketball jersey slipped down, revealing the tanned skin stretched tightly over the solid muscle. "Man, I am beat." "Yeah, me too," she said, taking his cue. Together they stood, and he walked behind her to the little hallway leading to their rooms. As she stepped into the hallway, the light behind her snapped off, plunging the space into complete darkness. Her steps slowed lest she meet up with something she didn't know was there. At that moment, she felt the warmth of his hand find the small of her back, and her entire body sprang to attention. Waves of feelings gushed through her with that one simple touch, and she had to beat them back down. At the end of the hallway, she could just make out the tiny shaft of light from her room, and just as she reached the door, she turned to lean against the wall. "Good thing I'm not scared of the dark." "Yeah," his voice whispered through the darkness. Although he was no longer touching her, she could feel him barely inches away, and desire in a form she hadn't felt in a long time caught her breath. "Well, sleep well." "You too," he said, and she felt him move away from her. However, at his door he stopped. "And if the dark gets too scary, I'm just across the hall." "I'll remember that," she said, her voice fighting not to sound breathless. When his door closed, Eve's eyes closed with it, and she exhaled. He was AJ. AJ, not Dustin. What was she doing? She couldn't be attracted to someone like him. He was young and out to have fun. He didn't know about the world and all the heartache it could hold. It was just being that close to a man again, she rationalized as she stepped into her own room. She could have fun with him, as friends, and that was as far as she wanted this or any other relationship to ever go again. When she climbed into bed, her thoughts drifted over AJ, sitting there in his basketball jersey and reversed hat. He was such a little kid. Then her thoughts snagged on to Dustin, and clinging tightly to that image, she fell asleep. Chapter 12. "You got everything?" AJ asked as Eve, barely able to move for all the clothing she had on, climbed carefully into the pickup. "If I don't, I am not going back in there to get it," she said. "I may die of dehydration before we get there the way it is." "Well, we wouldn't want that," AJ said with a laugh. "Here, at least take the coat off. It's going to be a little while before we get there." He reached over and helped her remove the purple parka, wondering briefly at the color choice. No, she already had that parka packed long before they made their first trek up the mountain. When she was down to her stretched thermal shirt and her black ski suit, he appraised her. "Better?" "I'll live." "That's the spirit." On the long drive to town, AJ spent the majority of it willing his gaze to stay on the road and not take too many trips across the seat to her. Her black hair stood out in contrast to her purple ear warmer, and the white of her shirt made the tan of her face even darker. It was really too bad that friends was all they would ever be, but in his heart, he was grateful for even that much. When they got to the slopes, they ambled their way up to the rental place and got in the short line. As they were moving forward toward the counter check-in spot, he leaned over to her. "There are ski poles. Don't get too close." "I'll try not to," she said, and his effort was rewarded with a broad smile. His selections were made long before hers were. First, her boots were too small. Then there was a latch broken on the next pair. By the time they had all of their things together, it was easier to just put their stuff together in one locker than to find two empty ones that worked. "Are you ready?" AJ asked when she pulled herself up from the little bench. "As I'll ever be." The day was beautiful. Light, fluffy white clouds floated across a crisp, clear blue sky as the ski lift swayed upward to the top of the mountain. AJ had offered to let her do a few experimental runs on the bunny slope, but Eve knew he would be bored stiff if she made him stay at the bottom, so she opted to throw caution to the wind and start at the top. "Look at that range," AJ said in awe. "Man, how anyone can look at that and say there's no God is beyond me." Eve's gaze transferred itself from the mountain to the angles of his face, set in perfect contrast to the scene beyond. Even his headgear, that black cap turned perpetually backward, seemed in perfect proportion. The only thing out of place was that comment. "What?" he asked as he turned to her questioning stare. "I didn't know you were into God and stuff." "Yeah, me and God go way back," he said with a soft laugh. "I prayed one time that he'd help me find my hamster. 2 hours later I found him, and I've been on pretty good terms with God ever since." She continued to look at him in amazement. "You know, I have the hardest time figuring you out." "Why?" "You just seem so young and carefree sometimes, and then it's like you're this wise old guru with all the answers." "Nope," he said, refocusing his gaze from her to the approaching lift station. "I'm just the guy who likes to play life by ear." She shook her head. "Well, you're sure good at it." He nodded to the lift station. "Here we go." One more moment, she looked at him, then she too got ready to dismount. At the top of the first run, AJ stopped and waited for Eve to come abreast of him. "Just like riding a bike, right?" "Something like that," she said, pulling at her glove. "You want to go first, or should I?" "I think I'd better," she said. "I might not be able to keep up with you." "Then lead the way, my lady," AJ said, sweeping a hand in front of him. With a breath, Eve pushed off from the top and angled her way first to one side and then the other. Purple and black ski suit, black hair, and purple ear warmer. It was a view he could definitely get used to. With no effort, he pushed off and followed her down, thanking Ashley and Gabe and God above for getting the two of them on this mountain together on such a beautiful day. Anything more would be gravy. For 2 runs down the mountain, Eve chose the green trails so she could get her ski legs under her. Twice she had managed to get far enough ahead of him to be able to stop and watch him come down the slope behind her. There was something so easy about the way he skied. In her experience, she was usually one small miscalculation away from disaster, but to see him, it looked like there was no such thing as a miscalculation. At one point she had stopped to watch, but when she turned around, there was no bright green parka to be seen. Then, like lightning, it flashed from amidst the trees, flying off of a jump that got bigger because of the angle he had chosen to take down the mountain. For 1 second, fear clutched her chest, but then he landed like a bird on its nest and slid down right to her side, spraying her with a top powder when he stopped. "Having fun?" she asked, barely containing her amazement or her amusement. "Always," he said with a huge smile as he readjusted the sunglasses disguising the softness of his golden brown eyes. She missed those eyes, but something about the sunglasses was appealing enough to not complain too much. "You ready for a blue?" He nodded to the sign just above her head. "I guess so." "We can stay greens if you want," he offered, leaning on his pole to do an impromptu stretch. "No, blue's fine." She gathered her courage and sent up a silent prayer that it was a blue more akin to a green than to a black. "You ready?" That smile flashed across his features. "Your lead." All day long, they had managed to stay on semi-easy blues, which AJ was glad for. She didn't have too much difficulty, but he could tell the tougher blues were testing the limits of her ability. More than that, the beauty of the morning hadn't lasted, as just after lunch a cold front had moved in over them, and a light snow had begun to fall. With each passing hour the snow had increased until it was falling in regular patterns from the gray sky above. As they went down just after 3, Eve's motions had become less decisive and much more determined. He could see her right leg fighting to get swung around with each and every turn she made, and it was clear that she was getting tired. When they pulled up to a stop at the top of the slope overlooking the chair lifts at the bottom, AJ noticed the tired tilt of her head over the ski poles. "You about ready to call it a day?" he asked. She fought with her clothing until she could see her watch. "It's only a little after 3. We can still make a couple more runs." The pros and cons of arguing ran through his head, and finally he decided to voice at least one. "I'd hate for you to be too sore to move tomorrow." "Me?" she asked incredulously. "I'd be more worried about you. I'm sure Jeff's got his sights set on those black diamonds I've been avoiding all day." However, she was still leaning against her poles, trying to catch her breath even as she said the words. Then maybe we'd better stop for my sake, AJ said, hoping his concern for her didn't sound in his voice. How about we go one more and then call it a day? He thought for a minute, but decided if they took it easy, which they had plenty of time to do, one more run didn't sound so awful bad. Your choice. A playful smile traced across her face. Race you! And with that, she pushed off. AJ laughed as he followed her down. Beating her would have been a breeze, but it was more fun to follow behind and let her think she was beating him. At the lift, it was clear that the weather had already sent many of the ranks scurrying for cover as they waited only 5 chairs before catching theirs. Carefully, he transferred his poles under his leg so he could have a few moments of rest. Without thinking, he swung his feet, heavy with the skis and boots, back and forth as the ground virtually disappeared beneath them. Don't you just love snow? He asked when they found themselves enveloped by it as the rest of life disappeared. Love it? No. There's a reason I live in Houston, Eve said, trying to get her glove off while holding her poles. Here. AJ reached over and took her poles from her. This dumb glove's had something in it all day, she said, pulling the outer layer off with her teeth. It feels like a pin right by my thumb. As she worked to get the underlayer off, AJ looked out to where they had once been able to see skiers. Man, it's really coming down. Yeah, no kidding. Eve shook the glove out, but it did no good. Crud, whatever it is, it's not coming out. He looked at her as she shook the glove harder. You know, if you drop that thing, I'm not going to jump out and rescue it. Her face fell in incredulousness. I wouldn't put it past you. No, even I have to draw the line somewhere. Good place to draw a line. Giving up, she pulled the glove back on. It's just going to have to hurt. No pain, no gain. She looked at him in annoyance. Like I said, you can be so wise sometimes. Hey, I try. The lift bumped over another lift support with 3 jerks. Eve looked up at it. I hate those things. Why? I'm always afraid they're going to dump me out. Finally, she got the outer glove back on. And I'm sure you wouldn't bother to jump out and rescue me either. Glove, Eve. AJ balanced the poles like a scales. Glove, Eve. It's a tough choice. With the back of the glove that was now in her hand, she reached over and whacked his shoulder. Hey! Rubbing his shoulder, he lifted his eyebrows. But that choice is getting easier all the time. She shook her head as through the now solid snow, the lift station came into view ahead. Holding out her hand, she said, Poles? He arched his eyebrows once again. I'm not sure if it's safe to give them to you. And if you keep making mean comments like that, it won't be. With a laugh, he handed her poles and retrieved his own from under his leg. Man, I hope we don't run into somebody in this mess. Yeah, you and me both, she said as she prepared to disembark. I'm thinking it's a good thing this is the last run. I'm thinking I'm agreeing with you there. The chair slid over the dismount area, and the 2 of them slid off, him going in a wide arc around the outside bank, and watching to make sure she had a smooth path as well. At the trail edge, she stopped. You following me? She asked. Right behind you. They pushed off, and in seconds AJ realized that the downward path of the snowfall looked much more horizontal and menacing when skiing into it. It took only the span of the first downhill slope for the iciness of the snow to start freezing the stubble that had appeared on his face since the night before. Ahead of him, she slid side to side through the snow slowly, although the thought occurred to him that he'd better keep up with her, lest she disappear completely. At the bottom of the first slope, she waited just long enough for him to bottom out before she started down the next one. This one was far steeper than the last one, and she was having to make wider arcs so as not to crash. Down, down they went. Then, just off to the right, AJ caught sight of something that didn't look quite right. Unmoving colors amid the white of the snow. Since it seemed to be on Eve's path when she made the next turn, he decided to ski directly over to it to check it out. Expertly, he pulled up on the scene and even managed to throw no snow across the 2 skiers making up the multicolors. One was bent over the other, and it didn't take more than one look to know that whatever happened wasn't good. "Get it off! Get it off!" The voice of the skier still in the snow begged. "It hurts." "How?" the other one asked, panic flooding through his voice. "How do I get them off?" With 2 clicks, AJ's skis were off, and he ran through the snow to the downed skier. Every step confirmed his worst fear. Without asking if they needed his help, he reached down and snapped off first one, then the other ski of the person lying in a tangled mess in the snow. He knelt next to the person he now realized was a woman, not so much because he saw her, but because of her voice. She was too wrapped up in clothing to be visually identifiable. "What happened?" AJ asked, even as he helped her roll up out of the snow, the skis no longer forcing her legs to stay in odd, unhealthy angles. "She was coming down," the man said. "I think she got her skis tangled, but they didn't pop off like they were supposed to." "AJ, what's wrong?" Eve asked as she skied up to the wreck. It hurts," the woman moaned, near hysterical with pain, as she clutched her right knee and swayed. "What hurts?" AJ asked, his focus totally on her rather than on the 2 bystanders. "My knee," she gasped, and started crying when she tried to move the leg. "Where on your knee? Show me where." Weakly, she ran her hand over the inside of her knee and yelped with pain the second she tried to move it. "Can you stand?" Fear jumped into her breathing. "It hurts so bad." Okay, AJ said, breathing for her. "We're going to get some help." When he looked up, his only clear visual was the snow. He assessed his options quickly. "Just stay here for a second. I'll be right back." Leaving her, he stood and stepped over to Eve, who had panic carved into her face. "You're going to have to go down and get the ski patrol." "Me?" Eve asked incredulously, as she transferred her gaze from the woman in the snow to him. "I need to stay here and help as much as I can, and I don't want her partner to go. She might need him. That leaves you." "But what do I tell them? I don't even know where we are." AJ realized that in her panic, Eve was going to need clear instructions from someone she trusted. Like it or not, that person was him. Gently, he took her shoulders and turned her just enough so that she was looking at him rather than at the woman still crying in the snow. "Ski down to the bottom. In this blizzard, you'll never find an emergency phone out here. When you get to the bottom, go to the first aid center. Tell them there's a skier down with a knee injury about 2/3 of the way down on Bear Run. Tell them we're going to need an emergency sled to get her down." Behind him, the woman screeched in pain and then whimpered, and Eve tried to look past him. However, AJ recalibrated her shoulders so that she was looking only at him. "Hurry, but don't do anything stupid, okay? We need you to get to the bottom in one piece." Clearly dazed, she nodded. "I'll ski down with them and meet you at the first aid center." Slowly, she nodded. Then she closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and when she looked at him again, he knew she would be all right. "I'll meet you down there," she said softly. Carefully, Eve turned her skis and started down the mountain, and AJ watched her until the purple parka disappeared into the veil of snow. Then he turned his attention back to the other 2. "I'm AJ, by the way, AJ Knight," he said as he knelt down in the snow next to the woman. "I'm a paramedic, and my friend is an experienced skier, so if you had to crash and get yourself in this pickle, you sure picked a good day to do it." Through the tears, the woman laughed and then winced in pain. "So, where are you guys from anyway?" AJ asked, knowing that waiting while she focused on the pain would make it that much more excruciating. Medically, there wasn't much he could do, but that wasn't the only area in which he had skills. "Oklahoma City," the man said. "No kidding. I have a cousin who lives in Oklahoma." At intervals, as Eve descended, her mind stumbled across the pitiful figure lying in the snow, crying in pain. She knew they had to do something, but had she been the one to have to come up with the what, they would have been in big trouble. Then, just as her mind threatened to slip off into fear and panic again, AJ's stern face snapped into her field of vision. He wasn't panicked. No, he was very clear on what needed to be done and how to do it. Maybe that was why he wasn't panicked. He knew what to do. It was a possibility, Eve thought as she bottomed out on the next slope near the sign pointing greens from blues from blacks. Blues would be faster, but if she got on a really steep one, the seemingly extra speed would be canceled out by her need for wider arcs. There wasn't much of a decision as she turned her skis down the green trail. They were up there, and they needed her. His determination and confidence flowed through her so that suddenly it felt like she was virtually flying down the mountain. There was a good chance that she had already broken her speed record today before this run, but this time, how fast she was going didn't seem to be a problem. She was in control, and she was on a mission. The fear factor would have to take care of itself. "We'd already decided it was our last run," AJ said as the snow continued down around them, "but I think Eve just wanted to get me really sore for tomorrow." "What's tomorrow?" the woman asked. It seemed that as long as she didn't move her leg, and as long as they had something to talk about, the pain was at least bearable. "Me and another friend are going to do the kamikaze thing, but I think Eve's strategy is to get me sore today so I'm not a lunatic out here tomorrow," he said with a laugh. "Smart woman," the woman said with a wince. He shook his head. "You have no idea." When she crested the last slope, Eve didn't so much as slow down. The few skiers left at the bottom of the mountain made for very simple obstacles, and in no time she was down. Quickly, she clicked off her skis, stood them next to the center wall, and tromped over to the first aid door. A patrol officer stepped out just before she got there. "We've got a skier down," she said, quickly striding the last few steps to his side. Concern washed over his face. "Where?" "2/3 down Bear Run on the right if you're coming from the top." "What kind of injury?" "Knee, and it's pretty bad. They're going to need help getting her down." The patrolman nodded and stepped off to the side to grab a phone. The confidence dropped away from her as Eve wrapped her arms around herself and looked up at the mountain, now completely invisible in the snow. "God, please help them." "A teacher?" AJ asked, wishing he could look at his watch, but knowing that would destroy what small hold he had built on the situation. "What do you teach?" "2nd grade math," the woman, who he had long before learned was Gail Everett from Oklahoma City, said. Since Eve's departure, he had learned that Gail was relatively new to skiing. She'd only been on blue trails 3 times. She had 2 small children at home. Her husband's name was Greg, and he had only been skiing 1 day. This was her brilliant idea. They were finished for this trip as soon as they made it down this time. So much for that. "Whoa, you are a real thrill-seeker," AJ said. "Forget black diamonds. 2nd graders would be enough for me. How many kids do you have at a time?" "Between 20 and 25, but I have 5 different classes a day." "You must be exhausted by the time you get home." "Sometimes," she said as AJ heard the faint sounds of the snowmobile. He waited a moment to decide which trail they were on. Then Gail heard it and looked up the mountain. "They're here, huh?" He smiled at her. "Sounds like it." He stood as the patrol pulled up. "What happened?" the patrol asked as AJ stepped over to shake his hand. "Knee injury. It's probably twisted pretty good. The skis didn't pop off." The patrol looked at him questioningly. "AJ Knight. I'm a paramedic from Houston. I just happened to come across them." "Oh," the ski patrol person said, and then he zeroed in on his patient as he stepped past AJ. It was then that AJ noticed Greg standing helplessly off to the side. As the ski patrolman started asking Gail questions, AJ stepped over to Greg and held out a hand. Greg never really looked at AJ. He kept his gaze on the figure in the snow. "Thanks for stopping," Greg said as he shook AJ's hand. "I didn't know what we were going to do." "They'll be bringing the sled pretty soon," AJ said, preparing Greg for the next step in what AJ knew would be a terribly long afternoon for them from this point forward. "They ski pretty fast when they take somebody down. Would you like me to ski with them, or with you?" "I'll be fine, but would you mind staying with Gail?" Greg said. "I'd hate for her to be alone when she gets to the bottom." AJ nodded. "Not a problem." People would walk past Eve into the warmth of the center, but she was stationed outside at the corner of the building, and until they came down, she wasn't moving. For a while the snow lightened, and she prayed that they would be coming soon. She wondered how long it took the patrol to find them, and if they had already. Alternately, she would think about the woman and then about AJ. How he was able to stay so calm, she couldn't quite tell. Had it been just her, she would probably have freaked out. However, every time her spirit dipped toward freak-out mode, his voice slid through her, calm and in perfect control. Hurry, but don't do anything stupid. Somewhere in the middle of her, that picture met up with the one of him, minus clothes, skiing breakneck for the bottom. He knew the depths of stupid, and yet, when it counted, he seemed far older than most people, twice his age. The kid and the guru, her mind said again, just as through the dense snow, the figure of the ski patrol became visible. Instantly, Eve straightened from her position, trying to make out the green parka as well. It took less than another second, and she saw it too. Breath returned to her body. Swishing side to side, they sliced their way down to the flat place, and then trekked over to the little barn next to the first aid center. "We're almost there, Gail," AJ said, even as he judged his speed with regard to the ski patrols as they negotiated the final flat spot. "We're going to go into a little barn thing, so we won't have to fight the snow." His commentary had started at the top and had not stopped all the way down, even though he wasn't even sure that she could hear him. "That second hill was fun, huh? Whew, they ought to put you on the bobsled team after that one." The little barn was dim and difficult to see in at first when they entered it, but AJ fought through the darkness so that when they began to unbuckle her, he was the first to see her. He smiled. "Hey, you look like a mummy." "Gee, thanks," she said, obviously fighting off the pain. "These straps are killing my legs." "And I'm sure the rest of the sled's like a 4-star Marriott bed," AJ said as the patrolman worked to unbuckle her. "Okay, Gail, you know how you got in that thing? Well, now we're going to have to get you out of it." She looked at him as if she'd rather be boiled alive. "That 4-star bed is looking better all the time." "Yeah, I bet." The last buckle was off, and AJ reached down for her hand as the ski patrolman assisted to make sure she didn't fall. AJ could tell she was in a great deal of pain, but she only whimpered. With her arm tucked under his, she hopped 2 steps. "It's right through here," the patrolman said, leading them into a bright yellow room. Once inside, a nurse directed them to a bed, and AJ helped Gail to it. Leaning against the bed, she slowly unwrapped herself from the outer clothing and the boots just as an anxious-looking Eve walked up. "Greg's going to be coming down," AJ said, focusing on Gail. "I'll go outside and make sure he gets here okay. This is Eve. She'll stay with you until I get back." When he looked at Eve, there were questions in her eyes, but she voiced none of them. As he passed her, he laid a hand on her arm. "I'll be right back." "I'll hold you to that." The clock in the base of the hill square was edging its way to 4:30 when, skis and poles in hand, they tromped their way off of the mountain. "You think she's going to be okay?" Eve asked. 6 months of great physical therapy fun, but she'll be all right," AJ said, suddenly sounding very tired. Eve smiled at him. "Bet you didn't think you'd be working on your vacation." "That's part of it," he said with a slight shrug as they got to the steps leading down to the rental store. They retrieved their things from the locker, returned Eve's items, and stored AJ's. As they walked out to the parking lot, the snow had thinned so that visibility was much improved. In her heart, Eve had something to tell him that felt more real than anything had in a very long time. Gently, she let her hand brush across his, but when he didn't respond, she took hold of his hand, liking the strength she found there. "I'm glad you were up there with me today." He looked over at her in surprise and confusion. Then his gaze dropped to the slushy snow at their feet. "I would have fallen apart without you," she said honestly as she tried to look at more than his profile. However, his gaze stayed down, and the best she could see was half of his cap, the sunglasses, and the edge of his face. "They were lucky to have you there, too." Reluctantly, he glanced at her. "I didn't have a choice." "You always have a choice," she said, purposefully swinging her steps into his. "Remember?" He smiled at her shyly. "Yeah, seems like I remember that part." They reached the pickup, and AJ went to her side to help her in. Once inside, Eve's hand suddenly felt cold without his there around it. When he jumped in on his side, he whipped the sunglasses off and threw them to the dash before he looked over at her with playful eyes. "What do you say we go get a couple of movies?" "Either that, or I get to interrogate you again," she said, falling deftly in step with his cue. "Movies. Definitely movies."
Like and subscribe to the Staci Stallings YouTube channel so you never miss a second of the story.
Chapter 13. The farther up the mountain toward the cabin they went, the more AJ realized they should have taken the car. It wasn't that the car would have been better for them, but if Jeff had needed a vehicle, he and Lisa should have had the pickup. Without alerting Eve to the small seed of worry in his heart, he tried to keep the conversation light. She had been through enough trauma without worrying about something that probably wasn't even an issue. "So, how sore are you going to be?" AJ asked, glancing over at her. "Not too bad, except for this puncture wound in my hand." She looked at her hand with concern. "Let me see," he said. Without hesitation, she reached her hand across the seat into his line of vision. True concern for the skinned gash drove into him. "Your glove did that?" "I told you it hurt," she said as she pulled her hand back to examine it. "Yeah, but you didn't tell me it was eating right through your hand." "I tend to underestimate these things," she said. "I can tell. When we get back to the cabin, I bet they have some first aid stuff or something. I'll get you fixed right up." Her eyes twinkled at him. "Ah, my own personal doctor." "AJ, your faithful white knight, at your service." She let her hand drop to her leg as she leaned back tiredly on the headrest. "How much longer?" "A good 20 minutes, he said, having timed their descent by the clock on the dashboard. "Why don't you close your eyes and take a little nap?" "I might just do that," she said, and her voice was already fading out. Careful not to jar her with the sound, AJ reached down and flicked on the CD he had brought and put in the stereo. It hadn't been played yet because until now, he just liked talking to her more than listening to music. The first strains of music filled the pickup, which was winding its way slowly up the gray-tinged highway. Unconsciously, his fingers caught the beat of the drums, and they beat it out on the steering wheel. Had it not been for the dull concern that Jeff and Lisa might need some transportation, AJ would have been perfectly happy to drive forever, with Eve's beautiful eyes closed peacefully at his side. It was all he now asked from the universe. "Is this going to sting?" Eve asked with concern as they stood together in the tiny bathroom doctoring her hand. "A little," AJ said seriously. Carefully, he dumped the peroxide over the wound and into the sink. Instantly, Eve jumped back even as he held her wrist steady. "Ow!" "I said a little." She shook her hand even in his to get the stinging to stop. A lot." "You have a high pain threshold, huh?" he asked teasingly. "Yeah, and you have a propensity for lying." She stopped shaking her hand. "One more," he said, holding the bottle over her hand. Quickly, he dumped the liquid, and she started hopping from foot to foot again, even as he held her wrist. "The next time I am not calling you." "The next time I'll bring anesthetic." "Good plan." With the cut now fully cleaned, AJ grabbed the wound cream from the cabinet and applied some. Then, with a rip through his teeth, he opened an extra-large Band-Aid and placed it on her hand. All done. Instinctively, she pulled the hand up by her heart. "And how much will that cost me?" "One pizza and movie night. Your choice of venue," he said as a broad smile slipped onto his face. "That doesn't surprise me," she said with a laugh. "You'll do just about anything for food." He laughed as he started to hand her the gloves. Then he stopped. What was in this thing anyway? Carefully, he turned the glove inside out and examined the black material by the thumb. He couldn't see anything, so he rubbed his thumb across it. Immediately, something jabbed into him. It was then that he realized what it was. This nylon thread's broken. Quickly, he reached into the first aid kit and pulled out the little scissors. With one snip, he set it back on the sink. He ran his thumb back over the material and smiled. All better. He handed the glove to her. "I guess this means I get to supply the Cheetos, too." "Hey, a trade's a trade." She laughed as he backed up far enough for her to cross in front of him and out the door. However, he stayed just long enough to clean up the medical supplies and put everything back together. With a snap of the light, he left the bathroom and went down the hall to join the others who were congregated in the kitchen. AJ was great, Eve was saying as his steps slowed toward the end of the hallway. I'm afraid I would have fallen apart. Oh, you never know, Jeff said as he worked to put the finishing touches on supper. You might be more helpful than you think. As AJ walked into the room, Eve held her hand out to him from the little stool where she sat by the bar. Although the gesture would have seemed perfectly natural had it just been the two of them, with Jeff and Lisa there to analyze it, it felt anything but. Nonetheless, he crossed the room and took Eve's outstretched hand so that he could stand behind her. With no pretense, she held onto his hand and leaned back into his chest. Well, I don't want to find out. I'm just glad he was there, Eve said, and when she looked up into his eyes, his heart turned over. How was your day? AJ asked, trying to turn the conversation away from him and Eve. Good, Jeff said. Very relaxing for a change. No 15 million phone calls, Lisa agreed, taking a sip of the apple cider in her cup. I think I could stay here forever. Nope, just through the next weekend, Eve said, tugging AJ's arm around her shoulder and over her body. Then Gabe will come kick us out, remember? Lisa shook her head. I can't even stay that long, or we'll have to drive back, and I don't think Jeff wants to put up with me in a car that long. Put up with you? Jeff asked, choosing his words carefully. I wouldn't call it that. Slowly, Lisa took a sip. Yes, you would. You're just too afraid to say it. Smart, Jeff said, tapping his head with the handle of the spoon. They call it being smart. AJ felt Eve laugh. They call it being married, Eve corrected. Jeff pointed the spoon at her. You got it. AJ's gaze traveled down to her. It was like holding a piece of his soul close, and for a moment he was afraid the word might send her skittering from him. However, she pulled his arm tighter around her, and he didn't move to protest. So, how was the snow? Jeff asked. Great powder, AJ said. If it keeps snowing all night, we should have perfect snow tomorrow. Too bad Gabe couldn't come, Jeff said as he banged the spoon against the side of the pan. He's going to be sorry he missed this. Yeah, I hope Ashley's mom is doing all right. You know, we brought our cell phone, Jeff said. We could always call them if there's a tower within shooting distance of here. Hey, I've got mine in my suitcase too, Eve said, as though she had just thought about it. I could go get it. After supper, Jeff said. This is ready. Cool. I'm starving, AJ said. And we're all so surprised by that, Eve said with a laugh. He grinned down at her. Hey, you're the one who only let me have 15 minutes to eat lunch. Aw. Eve rubbed her hand up and down his arm, causing chill bumps to crawl their way up his spine. Poor baby. Don't you feel sorry for him? Lisa looked at Eve, and they laughed as Lisa said, No. Anybody want some popcorn? AJ asked, holding the giant serving bowl over Jeff and Lisa, who sat together on the couch, fast-forwarding through the opening previews of the movie AJ and Eve had brought. Sure, Jeff said as he reached up for the bowl, but AJ yanked it away. Hey, I said some. He offers, and then he yanks it away. Jeff shook his head. Indian giver. And who's surprised? Lisa asked as AJ turned from the couch and met Eve returning fresh from her shower. Her hair was pulled up in a high ponytail, although straggled down her face were the pieces that hadn't made it into the ponytail. In a white tank top covered by a gray and blue patchwork button-down shirt that she hadn't bothered to button, and fitted gray jeans, she looked like she was planning to go out to some club rather than simply sit around and watch movies. Surprised by what? Eve asked, folding herself onto the ground next to one of the chairs, as AJ went into the kitchen and tried not to watch her figure as she moved. AJ's being stingy with the food, Lisa said. And you've been around him how long? Eve asked, laughing so that even 15 feet away in the kitchen, AJ's heart tripped forward a step. I didn't say you couldn't have any, AJ said, coming back over with 2 more bowls. I just said you couldn't have mine. He dumped a good amount of popcorn into each of the 2 bowls and handed them over the couch. Then he took the big bowl and swung a leg over Eve so he could sit down in the chair that she was sitting in front of. Carefully, he set the bowl next to Eve and took a handful. She took his cue and grabbed some for herself. Playfully, she threw a piece in the air and leaned over to catch it, but it landed next to his foot. He leaned over her shoulder to get some more popcorn. "Nice shot," he whispered softly. Her gaze slipped back to his, and suddenly, his soul was spinning through the depths of her eyes. She didn't say anything. Her smile made words unnecessary as she threw another piece of popcorn in her mouth. "Sure, he won't share with us, but he'll share with her," Jeff said, as if he was annoyed, although there was too much happiness behind his tone to think that he really was. Eve's gaze snapped away from AJ's, although it left only in the physical realm. In his memory, it was still right there. "What, are you jealous?" Eve asked Jeff, just as Lisa landed an elbow in the soft part of his stomach. "I was just saying," Jeff started, but Lisa cut him off. "Just be quiet and eat your popcorn." Jeff's eyebrows arched upward. It was a joke. "The movie's starting," AJ said, willing Jeff to take the women's advice and shut up. He really should have gotten Eve her own bowl. Somehow that simple thought hadn't occurred to him. Once more, he reached down and took a handful of popcorn. But this time, he was extra careful not to touch her or in any other way give the two people across the way reason to give them a hard time. "Oh, and before you say anything, AJ picked this one, so it's not my fault," Eve said, and when she reached down for more popcorn, her arm brushed across the loose material of his pants. Heat ripped through him. He couldn't be sure if she had done it on purpose or not, but it really didn't matter. That one brush brought his breath to a standstill. "Great, now you tell us," Lisa said dramatically. "Fair warning," Eve said with a shrug as she munched on the popcorn. AJ wanted to say something in his defense, but his brain could concentrate on nothing other than Eve's shoulders inches from his leg and likely to touch him again at any second. He shrunk back in the chair, hoping the others would drop it, and knowing there wasn't a single thing he could say that wouldn't get him in deeper than he already was. At that moment, Jeff caught AJ's gaze without the other two noticing, and Jeff's smirk said far too much. Whether that was the original plan or not, he was in this thing far deeper than he knew he should be. AJ knew it. Jeff obviously knew it. It was hope only that kept Lisa on the side of not knowing, and Eve was a question AJ couldn't even allow his brain to consider. It would have been nice to just ask her, but that option was fraught with more peril than it seemed. If she wasn't interested, he could ruin the friendship. If she was interested, but couldn't because of Dustin, that might throw AJ into a tailspin of doubt and uncertainty that he might never recover from. And then there was the possibility his heart seemed most concerned about. What if she was interested and ready? No part of him was sure he was. More than that, there were things she didn't know about him, things he couldn't tell her. The whole thing was a lose-lose-lose proposition. To his way of thinking, it was far better to just not look too closely at it, and maybe it would all quietly go away. His attention snapped back when the other three burst out laughing. Thankfully, he had seen this movie several times before, so he knew they were laughing at the movie, and not at him. Nonetheless, he was sure they would in fact be laughing at him if they could hear the thoughts running through his head. It was silly, ludicrous really, that he could ever have even a chance with Eve. Fighting that thought away from his soul, his gaze fell to his hands and brushed across the loose spirals of black waves inches away. She was his friend, and that was enough. "I don't think I've ever laughed so hard," Eve said as she lay on the floor looking up at the ceiling. Her hands lay across her stomach as her body wound down after the long day. In the chair looking down at her, AJ sat, and at that moment she was immensely glad that he had been there to share the day with her. That goofy lady selling squirrels. "You should have bought a squirrel!" The memory of the movie scene brought the laughter back to her. Man, I knew they were in trouble when they didn't buy that squirrel right away. Gazing down at her, he looked so serious. "So you liked the movie?" "Yeah, you don't have such bad taste after all," Eve said teasingly as she let her hand drop over to his ankle. "Well, thank you very much." He tilted his head, and slowly his gaze became even more serious. "I had fun today." "So did I," she said, exhaling so that everything in her relaxed into a peacefulness she hadn't felt in months. However, the intensity of his gaze dragged concern to her. "Sorry about before," he finally said softly as he glanced at the closed door Lisa and Jeff had disappeared into. Eve's heart fell with concern for the sad regret in his eyes. What before? His gaze snapped from the door to hers and then landed on his hands. "I didn't mean for them to make you. I should have thought farther than that." A moment she looked at him. Then, with a push, she sat up and faced the chair, folding her legs Indian-style beneath her as she put both hands on his ankles. Hey, they were teasing. The gold of his eyes stayed far away from her face. "Yeah, but I know you aren't. You didn't." Her face softened as a gentle smile slipped onto her lips. "I'm not mad. I kind of thought it was funny." He surveyed her face as the light flickered in the depths of his eyes. "You did?" "Yeah. Besides, if I listened to them, I'd already be married to Dante." Revulsion wrinkled across her nose. Now there's a scary thought. "What was so bad about him anyway?" AJ asked, tilting his head to the side in that way that made him look terribly young and vulnerable. He was so serious all the time with all the museums and the French restaurants. He even wanted to take me to the opera." "I take it you don't like the opera?" "I don't like movies with subtitles, much less whole performances where I have no clue what's going on." Slowly, she shook her head. "Besides, I don't need somebody to impress me, to sweep me off my feet and carry me away to some castle in the sky." Her gaze dropped to his socks. "I never did." For a moment, silence descended across the room. "Then what do you need?" AJ asked so softly she almost didn't hear the words. Looking up at him should have been hard, but her heart led the way to his eyes. "A really good friend." A gentle smile played across his golden tan features. "Then, I guess you got what you're looking for." Chapter 14. "You know," AJ said the next morning as he and Jeff sat at the little bar by the kitchen, hurriedly munching breakfast, "I think it'd be better if we take the car and leave the pickup here." Jeff chewed his toast as he looked over at AJ questioningly. The last thing AJ wanted to do was to alarm his friend, but the concern in his chest needed to be voiced. However, to soften the impact, he shrugged. If the girls need to go down for some groceries or something, they'd be better off in the pickup. Understanding slid through Jeff's eyes, and he nodded. "That's probably a good idea." "And I was thinking," AJ said, treading carefully across the thoughts that had slipped into and out of his consciousness all night. "Since you have a cell and Eve has a cell, maybe we should take yours, just in case. Not that we'll need to use them or anything." Jeff nodded. "That's probably smart. It's a good thing we know there's a tower somewhere out here." The call to Gabe the night before had gone smoothly, and to AJ that was a good sign. Lisa's door snapped open, and the two men looked back to her. "Morning," she said, although she didn't look fully awake. "I was afraid you might have left already." "Nope, just grabbing some breakfast," Jeff said, and he hugged her when she stepped into his arms. "We got some more new snow last night, so those first few runs should be unbelievable." "Well, don't let them be too unbelievable. I'd like it if you come back in one piece." She hit him softly with her hand. Then she looked over at AJ, who was trying not to intrude on their moment. "Don't let him do anything too dumb today." AJ smiled at her, hoping Eve hadn't let her in on all of his secrets. "I'll try to make him behave." "I'd appreciate that," Lisa said with a small laugh. She broke away from Jeff and walked around the counter to the cabinets. "Is Eve still sleeping?" "She had a pretty rough day yesterday," AJ said. "I think I wore her out." An amused glance from Lisa landed on him, and instantly he wanted to take the words back. "Skiing can be so tiring," Jeff said just before he tipped his bowl up and drank the rest of the milk. Quickly, AJ stood and took his dish over to the dishwasher. "I'm gonna go get my stuff." He took off down the hallway, the conversation behind him fading. "Would you be nice to him?" Lisa asked softly. "I am," Jeff protested. "No, you're not." AJ closed the door to his room quietly. The only good thing was that Eve hadn't been privy to that little scene. In fistfuls, he yanked up the gear he needed to take and stuffed it into his bag. At least flying down a mountain, they wouldn't have a chance to talk. He would just have to make sure Jeff didn't get a chance, or he knew what his friend suspected about his feelings would be verified in a heartbeat. Taking his gear, he went back out to the kitchen, listening for voices, but hearing none. A step into the kitchen, he realized why. Only Lisa remained, sitting at the bar drinking from a mug. "I take it you don't like to sleep late," AJ said, figuring the best defense was a good offense. "Not these days," she said with a laugh. "Too much action around my midsection." "So, how are you feeling?" AJ asked as he sat down 2 seats over from her and went about inspecting his gear. "Pretty good," she said. "A little tired since we've been up here, though." "Thin air," he said knowingly. "I'm surprised your doctor let you come." "Well, I go back the day after we get home. I just hope I'm not too jet-lagged that he'll notice." AJ looked at her, gauging the meaning of that answer, although he knew it wasn't his place to ask. "We're going to take the cell phone, and you all can have Eve's. That way, if you need something, you can get in touch with us." "Oh," she said in surprise. "Okay." "And we're leaving the pickup here," AJ said, suddenly wondering if leaving was such a good idea. "Did you get the directions to a doctor here?" Lisa shrugged. "Some old guy with a little clinic in town." "What's his name?" AJ asked, not sure how she would take the inquiry, but not really caring. "Breely. Horace Breely," she said without hesitation. "I even saw the clinic on the way in." "But besides the tired thing, you're feeling all right?" "I'm fine," Lisa said as Jeff tripped over his duffel bag when he came out of their room. "You know, skiing would be a whole lot more fun if you didn't have to lug 700 pounds of junk along to do it," Jeff said, throwing the things out from the doorway into the room before closing the door behind him. "Don't strain yourself," Lisa said in amusement. "You're one to talk," Jeff said, riding the duffel bag by the door. "Miss, I brought everything in my closet just in case." Lisa shrugged good-naturedly. "You never know what you're going to need." "Now you sound like someone else I know," AJ said as his heart swooped forward. "Don't encourage her," Jeff warned. "It doesn't matter," AJ said. "They do it with or without encouragement." "Hey, that's a two-way street there," Lisa said, ambling over to Jeff, who was still fighting with his gear by the door. When he stood, any pretend animosity dropped away from between them. "You have our number, right?" Jeff asked, and Lisa nodded. "Oh, man, what about Eve's? How are we going to get in touch with you?" Lisa shrugged. "We'll give you a call when she gets up." "Are you sure?" Jeff said as he leveled a serious gaze at her. Lisa laughed. "I can remember to make one phone call. Baby hasn't eaten that many brain cells." "Okay, but you take care of yourself," Jeff said gravely. "I will," Lisa laughed again. "And don't you go flying off any mountains or into any trees." "Just a couple," Jeff said teasingly. Lisa pulled him to her for a hug. "Well, at least you're smart enough to bring a paramedic along." "Can't be too careful," Jeff said, and then he kissed her. "Love you." "I love you." "We'll be back about 5:30 or so." "Thanks for the warning." She let him go, and he gathered up his things. Then, gently, she put a hand on his back, and when she turned to AJ, he saw the trace of concern in her eyes. "Take care of him for me." "Will do." "Okay, what's up with you and Eve?" Jeff asked from his perch in the driver's seat. The fact that they had made it halfway to the ski slope had seemed like such a good sign until that very moment. "Up?" AJ asked, examining his fingernails like they held the final key to solving world peace. "Why?" "Okay, you're dumb, but you can't be blind, too," Jeff shot. "Gee, thanks." "Seriously, are you interested in her, or what?" "Who wouldn't be? She's gorgeous," AJ said offhandedly. Slowly, Jeff shook his head. "No, it's more than that. I see how you look at her, and I think she's happier when you're around, too." "I wouldn't know. I've never seen her when I'm not around." Jeff drove down around 4 sharp corners before he looked back over at AJ. "Look, I don't have to tell you that Eve is like a sister to me, and I also don't have to tell you how hard on her Dustin's death was. But I think you need to know that I see something when she looks at you, something that hasn't been there in a long time. Just don't shut the door on the possibilities, okay? AJ knew far more about what was possible than Jeff ever would. Eve had told him outright. I'll keep that in mind. We're supposed to call them and give them your number, Lisa said when Eve stood in the kitchen making herself breakfast at just after 10. Why? Mischievousness traced through Lisa's eyes, and she dropped her voice seductively. AJ said he didn't want to go even an hour without hearing your voice. Ha ha, Eve sat down at the bar. No, I think they're afraid I'm going to go into labor or something, Lisa said, as if that was silly. Okay, that's not even funny. I didn't think so either, but I figured we'd better humor them or they're going to be coming back up here every hour to check on us. Lisa started for Eve's room. Where is it? Right side of the suitcase, Eve said as she poured milk over her cornflakes. In minutes, Lisa was back, talking, and a smile crossed Eve's heart. Jeff and Lisa, the two most unlikely people to hook up in the whole world. Yet, here they were, a month from the second miracle of their lives. But no black diamonds, right? Lisa asked. And don't let him talk you into any bowls, either. Okay, just a second. I'll get it. She pulled the phone away from her ear. Phone number? Eve quickly relayed the digits, almost wishing that Lisa would think to let her talk to AJ. She should have been smart enough to get out of bed this morning to tell him goodbye, but the dream she was having held her in a vice grip. Even here, over a bowl of cold cornflakes, it was right there. There was something about that dark hallway, something about being so close to him, and yet knowing that throwing logic to the wind wasn't an option. Over and over, her brain would put her there as her heart willed her to make a different choice. However, the choice was, and always would be the same. It had to be. Lisa beeped off the phone. I think they're going to go do the black diamonds. Eve shrugged, looking at the phone Lisa laid on the counter. I thought that was the plan. Yeah, but blacks? Ugh, that's so dangerous. Before she thought about it, Eve laughed. That's nothing. I think AJ and danger are like one and the same. Her brain caught up with her mouth just as the words left, and she looked over at the mortified face of her friend. But I'm sure they won't do too many dumb stunts. Jeff's smart enough to keep AJ in line. I hope so, Lisa said as she sat on one of the stools. She looked over at Eve. It's getting worse. What? Eve asked with concern. Letting him go. It was bad enough when it was just me, but now... Her gaze fell to her rounded stomach. It's so hard to watch him walk out that door. Compassion washed through Eve. AJ will take care of him. Lisa seemed to consider that a moment. Then she looked at Eve, and the subject changed in the middle of her eyes. So? Lisa asked leadingly, as she leaned onto the counter. So what? Eve asked innocently, as she spooned cornflakes into her mouth. So what happened last night? We watched a movie, Eve said with a shrug. Remember? You were there. Not the movie. AJ. Were there fireworks after we went to bed? We talked for a while, Eve said, holding the truth closer to her vest. She hated the fact that AJ was so sensitive about the teasing. She felt responsible for that. If she would have just been a little cooler about the whole thing when they got home, maybe Jeff and Lisa wouldn't have embarrassed him so much. However, the strange thing was, it seemed he was more concerned about her than about himself, and she couldn't quite figure that out. Lisa exhaled in frustration. You two should be on Oprah for as much as you talk. Eve shrugged. We're friends. Uh-huh, and that whole sitting next to his chair when there was one across the room thing? What was that about? The floor looked comfortable. Come on, Eve. Why don't you just admit you like him? I mean, what's there not to like? He's sweet, and he's cute, and you're married. Yeah, but you're not. The words superseded any thought on Lisa's part, and her enthusiasm deflated with them. You know what I mean. Yeah, Eve said softly. I do. Look, you don't have to sell me on him. I'm already sold. He's great, but as a friend. Is that the only word you know? It's the only one I want to know. Come on, Lise. I come with more baggage than a 747. He doesn't deserve that. He's free, and he's having fun. I don't want to drag him down. But he cares about you, and not just as a friend either. Panic surged through Eve. Why? Has he said something? Did he say something to Jeff? He doesn't have to say anything. It's not about words. It's about how he looks at you and how you look at him, and the fact that for the first time in a very long time, you're letting someone get close to you. That's real, Eve, whether you want to admit it or not. Slowly, she shook her head. He's just being nice. Because he likes you. We're friends. I know, you told me that. Lisa sighed slowly. Look, remember when Jeff and I first got together? Oh man, Panic City. But you kept telling me how he was different around me than he was around any other girl he'd been out with. Well, I'm telling you that about yourself now. You're different when you're with AJ. When he's around, you look like you want to live again. That's something special, and I don't want you to throw it away because you think you can only be friends, or that you have to stay friends because of the past. Eve wanted to protest, but no words came out of her mouth. You know, Lisa said thoughtfully, you told me once that if you ever had the chance to do it all again, you'd do it in a heartbeat. Well, maybe this is your chance. But I had it. I had my chance, and it's gone. No, Lisa said gently. Only Dustin is gone. AJ is right here. As that thought ran through Eve, Lisa jumped slightly. Oh, she said, laying a hand on her stomach. What? Eve asked, instantly glad for the diversion from her thoughts, but uneasy about the form it came in. A moment, and then Lisa shook her head. Sometimes those Braxton Hicks contractions get serious. She breathed a couple more times before she relaxed. Listen, Eve, I think I'm going to go lay down for a little while. Do you mind? Do what you need to do. I can find something to keep me busy. Carefully, Lisa slid off the stool. Think about what I said. Eve nodded and watched her friend cross the full length of the living room. When Lisa had gone into her bedroom and closed the door, Eve thought about Lisa's words. Dustin was gone. The man she thought was the only one she would ever love had been stolen from her grasp, and now in front of her stood someone new. Someone who felt so close to her own soul that it scared her breathless. She put her dish in the dishwasher, grabbed a pillow from the couch, and flopped into the chair he had occupied the night before. Her gaze went to the snow falling gently outside the window as she let her mind drift, to him, to AJ, and for the first time, she placed no limits on where those thoughts could take her. A black diamond? Jeff asked skeptically. AJ looked over the edge. It's an easy one. And you're going to explain the broken leg to Lisa? Hey, you heard her. You're with a paramedic. How much safer could you get? Reality swirled away from Eve, and suddenly she was back in the dark hallway, sensing him barely inches away from her. Only this time, she wasn't hoping he would turn and go into his room. No, every piece of her wanted him to step next to her, to take her in his arms. As she closed her eyes, she felt the warmth of him closing the space between them, making time stand still. Are you sure? His voice asked softly. Yeah, she breathed, willing him to make the space between them vanish. Eve, a voice outside her head said, but it wasn't his. Eve? Instantly, she was awake, and the dream fell away from her. Lisa? With one glance, reality surged forward. What's wrong? Lisa stood, hunched slightly with her hand on her stomach. I think we need to call somebody. Call? Eve sat up in the chair. Who? The doctor, Lisa said as she doubled over. Oh my gosh, the baby? As Lisa nodded, Eve vaulted from the chair and over to her friend. Contractions? You're having contractions? Again Lisa nodded. Oh gosh. Air failed. Phone, where's the—" In the middle of her panic, she found the phone on the bar. "What's his number? Do you have a phone book?" Lisa leaned back into the couch as the contraction subsided. "The number's in our room, in my black carry-on." Without asking any more, Eve raced to the open bedroom door and scanned the room. Black carry-on. One swipe, and it was on the bed. She pushed the strands of hair out of her face as her hand searched. "Side pocket," Lisa called from the living room. "Got it," Eve said, yanking the paper from its hiding place. She fought to breathe, to think, as she crossed with the number back out into the living room. Quickly, her fingers dialed the number as panic flooded through her. The phone clicked. "Yes, is this—" She looked at the note in her hand. "Dr. Brealey's office?" "Okay, good. Listen, my friend just went into labor. I need to know what to do." "How far apart are the contractions, ma'am?" How far apart are the contractions, Lise?" "About 4 minutes, I think." "About 4 minutes," Eve said, pushing the hair back from her face as she watched Lisa's face and body contract again. "Oh no, here's another one, Lise." She knelt down by the couch and laid a hand on her shoulder, wishing she could do something more to help her friend. "How far away are you from the hospital?" the lady asked. We're about 30 minutes from town," Eve said, fighting to keep rational with her. "Okay, the hospital is on the far east side of town. Once you get to town, you'll see the signs. I'll have the doctor meet you there." "Oh, okay. What's the patient's name?" Lisa Taylor." When she signed off, Eve's brain immediately ran into 6 different problems. "I've got to get the directions back down. Where would they be?" "I think he put them in our suitcase," Lisa said, trying to get comfortable but obviously not succeeding. "Okay." Eve took half of a calming breath and raced back into the bedroom. Suitcase. She headed for it and grabbed the top clothing. Crud, where are they? The gasp from the couch did nothing to settle her nerves. "Lisa? Are you okay?" But there was no answer. "Please, God, I can't do this alone. Where are they?" Deciding at the bottom of the suitcase that the directions weren't there, Eve redirected her search to the dresser drawers. She was making a huge mess, but there weren't enough brain cells to care. Papers. With one hand, she grabbed the sheaves from the top drawer. "Thank you, God." Her feet traced back out into the living room. "I found them." "Could we call Jeff?" Lisa asked, and her voice was filled with the panic that laced Eve's entire body. "Yeah, I'll call them. I've got to get my boots." Dialing even as she ran to her room, Eve's mind was so jumbled she wasn't sure that what was going to come out of her mouth would have any basis in reality. She yanked one boot on as the phone rang. It rang again. "Oh, come on." She grabbed the other boot and pulled it on. Still the phone rang. "Come on, pick up the phone." The moan from the living room yanked her attention away from the phone, and she hit the off button. Back in the living room, she surveyed the situation and prayed sincerely for divine help. She certainly needed more than she had. "We're going to have to get you to the pickup," Eve said, like a drill sergeant. "Where are your shoes?" "Bedroom." Eve headed back to the bedroom, her mind sliding through her previous 2 visits, looking for the shoes before she got there. She threw the clothes at the end of the bed back into the suitcase in a heap and yanked the shoes from the floor. Her legs carried her into the living room where she slipped the shoes on Lisa, and she stood to survey her friend. "Coat?" "Back of the door," Lisa said as another contraction clamped over her. Torn between staying with her friend and getting things ready so they could go, Eve finally chose getting ready. Sitting here wasn't going to help, and it was obvious that Lisa needed more help than Eve could give her. She grabbed the coat and Lisa's purse for good measure. "You okay?" she asked, knowing it was a dumb question. The pain subsided from Lisa's face. "Did you get the guys?" "We'll call them from the pickup," Eve said, not wanting to panic her friend. She went to the couch and did her best to help Lisa up. Sanity clicked in long enough to grab the keys from the counter, and they started for the door. They had a scant 4 minutes to get to the pickup. "Okay, I know you don't want to hurry, but I don't think contractions in the snow sound like much fun, so—" At that moment, Eve pulled the curtain back on the double sliding doors to reveal a winter wonderland of white and gray. Oh, sheesh. Okay. Eve corralled her own alarm as she slid the door open. We're going to have to be real careful down these steps. Already, little tufts of snow had accumulated on the steps. One slow step at a time, they descended. How are you doing? You okay? Lisa nodded, clearly not wanting to use precious energy on speaking. Good girl. Finally, they reached the bottom. Careful, some of this might be deeper than it looks. She was breathing through the seconds, ticking them off in her head with every step they took. They were running out of time to get to the pickup door. She looked at Lisa. She would have liked to tell her to hurry, but hurrying wasn't a great idea either. A little further, just a little. Oh! Lisa gasped as she grabbed for Eve. 6 more steps, Eve coached. In that same second, Lisa's eyes crumpled on the pain as she moaned. Breathe, Eve said, stopping in utter helplessness. Just breathe. She had no idea how to do baby breathing, and the truth was, she wasn't breathing either. But somewhere in the back of what little she knew about having a baby, there was something about breathing. Lisa's fingers wrapped into Eve's arm as Eve stood, watching, powerless to help. After many agonizing seconds, Lisa finally nodded and straightened enough so that Eve knew they could get the rest of the way to the pickup. With a swipe, Eve cleared the stacked snow from the passenger's door. It was a struggle to get Lisa up into the cab, but when she was in the pickup, Eve breathed a sigh of relief. Just get her to the hospital. Everything will be fine. Race you down, Jeff said as he stood at the top of the steepest example of a black diamond they had encountered so far that day. I thought you didn't do black diamonds, AJ said with a laugh. I thought I didn't too. With that, Jeff jumped off the top, swinging his skis expertly side to side over the moguls. Slowly, AJ shook his head. Lisa would surely kill him if she ever found out. I've just got to get this thing turned around, Eve said as the immensity of the pickup's frame suddenly became very real in her consciousness. She put a hand on the gearshift and pulled it into drive. With the first pressure of the gas, the tires spun underneath them. Focusing on her breathing, if only to keep herself sane, Eve turned the pickup wheels to the side, and the pickup bucked forward. Oh, easy, Lisa moaned. Sorry. The windshield wipers swiped across the windshield, causing Eve to jump. Come on. Cautiously, they angled across the road, but the banks on either side came up to the pickup's grill. She drove as far forward as she could, then put the gearshift into reverse. However, when she turned around to look out the back, snow was all she saw. She threw the pickup into park. Just a second. With just more than a swing, she got into the pickup bed, and the snow crunched right over the top of her boots. Quickly, she wiped off the fluffy white mess covering the back window. Then she jumped back to the ground and crawled in just as Lisa pulled her shoulders forward to her knees. Another one? The only reason for the question was to reassure herself that some part of her short-circuited system still worked. She put the pickup in reverse and started backing just as the full impact of the contraction hit Lisa. Ow! Lisa screamed, and for 1 second too long, Eve's attention went to her friend. In the next split second, she felt the back end of the pickup sink. When she looked into the windshield, it wasn't the road she saw. It was trees. Quickly, she shifted gears to go forward. However, the pickup did little more than spin. No, come on. Rocking her body in a desperate attempt to get the vehicle to move, she fought off insanity. Oh no, Lisa said in fear next to her, and Eve looked at her. Blank numbness gazed back at her. I think my water just broke. Uh-oh. Desperately, Eve rocked forward, but the tires did no more than spin. After another frantic moment, rational kicked her in the head. The pickup wasn't going anywhere. Guilt washed over her as she glanced at Lisa. Well, I guess we have to go to Plan B. Trust, because there was no other option, was in Lisa's eyes. What's Plan B? I have no idea. Man, those clouds look worse than they did yesterday, AJ said, appraising the clouds sliding over the mountains in the distance. The thick, dark gray clouds had no trouble completely obscuring all traces of the majestic peaks. The lift ascended higher, drifting up toward their destination. Isn't that where the cabin is? Jeff asked with some concern. Yeah. You know, we haven't heard anything from the girls since this morning. You think they're okay? Wouldn't hurt to check, AJ said, feeling that same vague unease he had the day before as he looked at those clouds. Ominous hardly described them. Jeff needed no more prompting. He pulled the little cell phone out and looked at it. Oh, man, it was off. Off? With short punches, Jeff clicked the phone on and dialed the number. It must have gotten shut off in my pocket. That news didn't help the apprehension in AJ's chest. His whole focus went to his friend's face as they waited. Concern turned to confusion, and then to fear the longer Jeff sat without talking. AJ's gaze went back up to the invisible mountain as he tried to think through the situation. Finally, Jeff hit the off button. They don't answer. Don't answer? That doesn't make any sense. They'd have to hear it. The other side of the conversation dropped away as Jeff redialed the number. He waited. AJ waited, fighting not to let the fear crawl into his gut. Jeff shook his head slowly, waited a moment more, and then hit the off button. Nothing. AJ looked at Jeff, and then at those clouds. He wanted to panic, but that wasn't going to help Jeff, who had already paled to 3 shades of white. We'll call them again at the bottom. Maybe there's something in the way up here. Granted, that didn't exactly seem possible, but it was the most plausible excuse he could come up with. Besides, he knew Jeff already knew the score. One look at his face was enough to verify that. Closing his eyes, AJ willed his strength into Eve just in case she needed it at that moment. However, when he opened them, all he saw were those clouds, and fearful anxiety twisted inside him. Chapter 15. 2 more, Eve said as she carefully balanced both her and Lisa back up the front porch steps. Good girl. She went to the sliding door and opened it, realizing she hadn't bothered to lock it on their departure. Oh! Lisa's hand grabbed onto Eve's arm, and the fingers dug further than they had the last time. Okay, breathe, Eve said as they stood on the front porch, the swirling snow whipping around them. I can't. It hurts, Lisa said in breaks and breaths. You have to. Listen, you have to concentrate on breathing. Think about breathing. Agonizing seconds slipped by until finally Lisa's body relaxed slightly. You ready? Eve asked, and she waited for Lisa to nod before she helped the bent and huddled frame through the door. That one was closer than the last one, wasn't it? I've got to lay down, Lisa said, gasping through the pain that hadn't totally receded. Okay, let's get to your room. Helping her step for step, Eve's mind was like a laser. Just get her to that bed, and somehow they could deal with everything else. In the room, Eve worked to get the bed ready for Lisa to get into. Careful up. Lisa had hardly collapsed into the pillows when the next wave of pain hit her. Instantly, Eve huddled at her side and did what she could to ease the searing pain screeching its way through her friend. As that contraction slipped into the past, Eve began to seriously consider what her next move was. She looked around the room, really hoping that something would tell her exactly what to do next. When she found nothing, she straightened and assessed her options. There weren't many, and none of them made her feel at all calm. I want Jeff, Lisa said, her voice somewhere between weak and pleading. Okay, Eve said, seeing a break in what she could do. Her gaze swept the room. Dang it, I left the cell phone in the pickup. I'm going to go get it. You'll be okay? Lisa nodded with barely enough energy behind it to accomplish that. Okay, don't move. Don't worry. No answer, Jeff said as AJ stood at his side at the base of the ski slope. AJ exhaled in frustration as he looked up at the clouds now moving in over them, whipping the snow with it. Skiing was no longer so much as a consideration. Would they have gone to the hospital? I don't know, Jeff said, his face registering panic at the very thought. Maybe. Eve would have been smart enough to get her to the hospital, AJ said, sounding far more sure than the pit of his stomach felt. Let's go get this stuff back. Jeff looked less than assured. With a tight smile, AJ clapped him on the back. I'm sure everything's cool. We'll just go check. When Eve retrieved the phone from the front seat of the pickup, her first thought was to call the guys. However, she knew that getting the doctor was more important, so her first call when she got back into the cabin was to the clinic. Unfortunately, the doctor was already at the hospital, so then she had to call there. It was like playing phone tag with an invisible target. Busy, Jeff said in irritation as they stood in the rental shop waiting to return their gear. Well, at least we're getting through now, AJ said, sincerely hoping that was a good sign. No, we don't have another way down, Eve said as her mind spun toward the black hole of desperation. Which direction are you from the town? The receptionist asked. I don't know. Left from if you're coming in from Albuquerque. Left? North? Yeah, I guess so. It's snowing pretty good up there, the receptionist said. Are you on the main highway? No, we're off, back in the trees, Eve said, hearing the panic in her chest jump through the words as Lisa screeched in pain from the other room. I don't know. That country's pretty treacherous if we don't have really good directions. Directions, Eve said, catching on the word. I have some directions. Instantly, her search mechanism lurched into gear. Where'd they go? They were here. The pickup. Just a second. I've got to get them. Adrenaline carried her right out of the cabin and to the pickup, where she ripped the door open and grabbed the pages. Here they are. Yeah, north, the receptionist said, her voice fading back in. I'm sorry, ma'am. The doctor says it's too dangerous to make that trek in this weather. The pages blurred in front of her. But we need him. He understands that, but in this weather it's too likely that he'll miss a turn or take a wrong one. No, you don't understand. I can't do this alone, Eve pleaded as another wail came from the bedroom. Lisa needs a doctor. If the weather breaks. No, by then it'll be too late. Please. You can call us back when the contractions get a little closer. Closer? No, they're... Good luck, and the phone clicked off. Here, let me try, AJ said, taking the phone from his friend when they got into the parking lot. There wasn't much more that he could do, but the way Jeff looked, he would be a poor translator of even the most benign news at the moment. The net beneath Eve's high wire act dissolved, and she looked down at the phone in shock. Eve, Lisa cried, is Jeff coming? Jeff? Eve asked, snagging on the name with no understanding. At that moment, the cell phone in her hand rang, and she looked at it for a minuscule second before pushing the on button. Yeah, hello? Terror twisted through AJ at the first hint of the fear in her voice. He put a finger in his ear to block everything other than her voice out. Eve, what's wrong? Where are you? AJ? He heard the panic in the two letters. AJ, is that you? Yeah, what's going on? It was then that he heard the cry, and he knew. What is it? Jeff asked, pulling at the arm of his shirt. Is Lisa okay? It's Lise, Eve said through the phone. She's in labor. Are you at the hospital? No, Eve said, and tears crowded over the word. I got the pickup stuck. I can't get her out of here. She was hardly breathing through the words and the emotions. The doctor? He can't come. He won't come. The weather's too bad. What did she say? Jeff asked in wild-eyed panic. Is Lisa okay? AJ brushed him off, knowing he had to make a choice between them. He started the little car, realizing that sitting in the parking lot wasn't getting them any closer, any faster. Eve, listen to me. Where's the doctor's office? No, he's not there. He's at the hospital. Are you sure about that? He backed out and turned toward the front gate, which was nearly invisible in the snowstorm. Yeah, I just talked to him. Well, not to him, but... Another agonizing moan. and AJ calculated them in his head. "Okay, listen to me. We're going to go get the doctor, and I'll call you back as soon as we're headed that way." "No, AJ, don't leave me. I don't know what to do." "Help her breathe," he said, slowing his own breathing to corral the panic in his heart. "Keep her calm. Give her ice chips if you have any. I'll call you back in a few minutes." "Oh, okay," she said unsteadily, but no longer hysterical. "I'll talk to you in a minute." They signed off as he pulled onto the highway. Snow hit the windshield so that visibility was cut to nearly nothing. "It's bad, huh?" Jeff finally asked, barely breathing. "She's in labor. We just have to get a doctor up there and we'll be okay." "Crud!" Jeff hit the dashboard full force as his face crumpled on the news. "I knew I shouldn't have left." AJ glanced over, but only for a brief second. "You can't be with her every second. She's going to be fine. Just hang on to that, okay?" Fighting the fear that looked more like anger, Jeff shook his head. "We've got to get up there." "We will, I promise." "Everything's fine," Eve said in her best lying voice as she brought a cup of ice into the bedroom just as Lisa fell back into the pillows, spent from the last contraction. "I brought you some ice. They said you can suck on it for a while if you want." "Are the guys coming?" Lisa asked, and her eyes held far more fear than they had when Eve had left. Her hair was damp from the sweat, and her chest rose and fell without taking in much air. "They're on their way." "And no reports of broken bones or anything?" "Not a single one. Jeff must have taken it easy on AJ." Lisa smiled weakly. "I'm sure Jeff is the one you were worried about." "You never know," Eve said. "Him and Dustin could make hanging shoe racks look dangerous." A picture of Dustin fighting to keep the rack on the closet door while Jeff worked with a screw gun floated through her mind. Funny, that may well have been the first time she had seen Jeff. She couldn't really remember. There were too many other images to be sure. Nonetheless, Jeff's frantic attempts to get the gun going in the right direction as Dustin struggled with the metal tubing brought a smile to her face even now. "Shoe racks?" Lisa asked with a raise of her eyebrows. "Haven't I ever told you that one?" "I don't think so," Lisa said, relaxing for the first time in more than an hour. "We need to speak with Dr. Breeley," AJ said, not trusting Jeff to be coherent at this point. They had already worked their way through a mini maze of receptionists and nurses, and very few had been anything close to helpful. The nurse at the desk looked at him as if she would rather eat a raw fish. "We have to talk to him right away," AJ said, not willing to take the no in her eyes as an answer. "It's an emergency." The skepticism didn't leave, but she picked up the phone and paged the doctor. AJ looked at Jeff and nodded in encouragement. Minutes ticked by. Impatiently, AJ looked at his watch. 2:30. He wished he knew more about how long Lisa had been in labor. He had known for nearly 20 minutes, but before that? His brain worked through the time they had been on the slopes. How long had Eve been trying to call? Or had she just started? "May I help you?" the voice said from behind them, and when AJ turned, the antipathy he had felt toward the doctor when Eve had told him Breeley wasn't coming dissipated. "Are you Dr. Breeley?" AJ asked the tiny man, who looked like he had to be getting close to 90. "I am." With white hair, sun-bleached wrinkles, and eyes hidden behind thick black-framed glasses, Dr. Breeley looked far more like a patient than a doctor. "They said it's an emergency." "Yes, sir," AJ said, taking one look at Jeff and forcing himself to calm down enough to make their case. "We have a woman in labor. She's up in the mountains. She's only about 36 weeks along, and they can't get her down here." "This seems to be a pattern today," Dr. Breeley said, wrinkling his forehead further, but AJ could see that the statement was not bitter, but of great concern for the doctor. "We had a young woman call in earlier." "That was probably Eve," AJ said, putting the pieces together. "She's with Lisa Taylor," Dr. Breeley said. "Right, Lisa Taylor. This is her husband, Jeff. We were skiing and Eve called us. They're stuck up there. The vehicle they had got stuck." The doctor pushed up his glasses in concern. "I wanted to go, but I don't see as good as I used to anymore." Options flowed through AJ's head. We can take you. Consideration traced across the doctor's face. Let me get some things together. Great, we'll be here. During the contractions, Eve did her best to hold Lisa's hand and help her through them. 4 minutes was a thing of the past. They were now at a shaky 3, and Eve wished she knew at what point things were going to get really serious. She had managed to get Lisa out of her clothes and into her gown. She had also corralled all of the towels from the master bedroom and had them stacked near the bed, ready. Strange what little tidbits of information came up in the middle of a brain fraught with chaos. Towels, breathing, hot water. She wasn't at all sure what to do with any of them, but she assembled them anyway. Nonetheless, at each contraction, she ran back to the room, fearing that the baby might make its appearance on any one. What she would do if that happened, she wasn't sure at all, but staying busy made that possibility seem less imminent. When the phone rang, Eve slid off the bed to answer it. Hello? Eve, how is everything? AJ's voice cut over the line, and she sucked in a ragged breath as she glanced at the sweat-soaked, exhausted figure of her best friend. We're hanging in. She stepped out of the room. Where are you? We just picked up Breely, and we're headed up there. You're still in town? She asked, having sincerely hoped that they would be only 10 minutes or so from the cabin by now. We just left. The snow's pretty bad, so I don't know how great of time we're going to make. Lisa's cry of pain yanked Eve's attention back to the room, and she raced back in. She took Lisa's hand as panic surged through her again. It's okay, Lise. Breathe. In, out. Breathe. Good girl. How far apart are they? AJ asked. We're getting down to about 3 minutes each, she said as tears of helplessness washed over her. Listen, I'm going to put the doctor on so he can tell you what to do in case the baby comes before we get there. Before? No, AJ! She stood from the bed and walked out to the living room, pushing all the hair up to the top of her forehead in consternation. Look, I don't do blood, okay? I'll pass out. I will. I can't do this by myself. You've got to get up here. Eve, listen to me, he said calmly. If she doesn't go really fast, we should get there in plenty of time. But there's a chance that we won't, so I want you to talk with the doctor. No, AJ, I am telling you I can't do this. I can't. Do you understand me? I can't do this. Eve, he said, cutting into the panic. Look, you don't have a choice here. Lisa needs you. Tearful panic swept through her system at the thought of what he was telling her, even as the moans of agony sounded from the bedroom. I thought I always had a choice. Yeah, well, this time your choice is do it, or find a way to do it. The choices, or lack thereof, wound through her until her brain wrapped around his words, and she realized he was right. She had to pull it together. There was no other choice. Okay. Good. Okay. Here's the doctor. AJ handed the phone into the back seat, praying that whatever instructions the doctor gave Eve wouldn't totally freak her out. She was on the verge of losing it, and every word was more like a time bomb than a simple set of letters. As he guided the car around another hairpin curve that was only semi-visible through the snow, he glanced over at Jeff, who sat in dumbfounded silence. She's at 3 minutes, AJ said. I should have been there. I shouldn't have left. Hey, man, this stuff happens. Babies aren't on the same schedule as the rest of us. When Jeff looked over at his friend, the helpless anguish there tore through AJ like a knife blade. He had seen that same look before, on a sidewalk under the canopy of an inferno. That time, he had failed his friend, miserably. This time, he was determined not to. Solidly, he reached across the seat and gripped Jeff's shoulder. We'll get there, I promise. Jeff's eyes spoke of, I hope so, and I don't have a choice but to believe you. However, the overwhelming distress was still there. Mr. Taylor, the doctor said from the back as he held the phone over the seat. Mrs. Taylor would like to speak with you. Gingerly, Jeff took the phone as AJ's heart went with it. Lise, Jeff asked, but the name barely made it from his lips. "Hey, sweetheart, how are you doing?" "Yeah, we're on our way. We'll be there as soon as we can." "I know. I love you too." When AJ looked over, he watched as utter helplessness washed over Jeff's face. "I'm so sorry, baby. Hold on, okay? We'll be there." He wasn't even breathing anymore as AJ reached over and took the phone from his limp fingers. The screams of pain still reverberated through the airwaves, and AJ had no question as to why Jeff's whole countenance had frozen dead with horror. AJ righted the phone on his own ear as the noises on the other end stopped completely. "Hello? Hey, is anybody there?" Yeah, I'm here," Eve said, not totally panicked, but certainly not calm. "Running out of great advice to give myself, though. You know, think positive and all that junk. Believe me, it's highly overrated." AJ laughed softly. "Just remember, God'll never give you more than you and he can handle together." "Oh yeah? Then I'm thinking we're going to have a serious sit-down about that one." The line snapped in two as AJ drove around another corner. He looked down at the phone, sighed, and hit the off button. The wipers beat back and forth so that he really needed both hands for driving anyway. Whether she knew it or not, Eve was far from the weakest-spirited person on the earth. She would do whatever she had to do. His job now was to get them there so she wouldn't have to do it alone. The feeling of being totally alone swept over Eve when the line went dead. However, all it took was recalling the soft calmness of his voice to remind her that she wasn't alone. She hit the off button and set the phone on the dresser. The doctor had given her enough instructions to give her something to do. "I think I'm going to hit Jeff over the head when he gets here," Eve said as she went about clearing everything that wasn't nailed down away from the end of the bed. "Why's that?" Lisa asked, as if she were hardly there anymore. "He was all happy about getting a relaxing vacation yesterday. It's just like a man to leave me with moving all the furniture." She heaved against the chest at the base of the bed. When it didn't move, she went to the other side to pull on it. "Don't hurt yourself," Lisa said with blurry concern. After another futile attempt, Eve opened the trunk and started pulling stuff out. Pile after pile she set over in the far corner. That'd be good. Then they could take both of us to the hospital. 4 people and a pregnant lady in one little car? I don't think... Pain closed in on Lisa before she knew it was coming, and instantly Eve dumped the contents in her hands back in the chest. She took Lisa's hand, which tightened around hers until her fingers turned white, but she hardly noticed. "Breathe, girl, breathe. You're doing great. Short breaths. Work through it." Eve pulled her watch up to check the seconds that passed between the first hint of contraction and the end. Why that was particularly important, she wasn't sure, but it was one of the things the doctor had said to find out. So, find out she would. "How much longer?" Jeff asked, glancing at his watch as his leg jumped up and down on the seat. "How long since we left town?" AJ asked. He didn't want to take his gaze off the road for even a moment. On one side, he could see the mountain. On the other, he knew there was a drop-off, but he couldn't tell where the road stopped and the free fall began. "Almost an hour. It shouldn't be taking this long," Jeff said. "Are you sure we didn't miss the turn?" AJ glanced down at the speedometer. The car was going barely 10 miles an hour. "It's the snow. I'm afraid to go any faster." No, I know you're right," Jeff said, although he didn't sound happy about the fact. "It's too dangerous to push it too hard." Nonetheless, praying it was a good decision, AJ pressed the accelerator down a fraction of an inch so that the meter crossed up to 15 and then near 20. Precious time was sliding by, and with every passing minute, they got just that much closer to being too late. The slow blink of Lisa's eyes made Eve wonder if she would have the strength to make it to the end of this road. Towels soaked with blood lay on the bathroom floor in direct line of sight from where Eve was as she sat down on the bed to retake Lisa's hand. She couldn't think of them. She couldn't think of anything other than making it to and through the next contraction, and what she needed to do as soon as it was over. "You look absolutely exhausted," Eve said as she ran her hand over the cold washcloth she had laid across Lisa's forehead longer ago than she could remember. Lisa's hazy gaze traced over her friend as she reached up and clasped Eve's hand. "Thanks for being here." Eve smiled, hoping it didn't look like she was sitting by a deathbed. "Hey, where else would I be?" A jerk, and Lisa shrieked in agony as her body bowed over itself again. There was hardly a reason to time them anymore. By the time one stopped, the next one was only a minute away anyway. As Eve did her best to coach the hunched figure through the pain, the phone on the dresser bleeped to life. Wishing her arms were long enough to reach it without letting Lisa's hand go, Eve took 2 seconds to grab the phone before she returned. "Yeah." "How's Lisa?" AJ asked without introduction. "She wants to push," Eve said. The doctor's admonition from earlier to keep her from doing that still rang through her head. "I don't know how much longer we can keep this up." "We just passed the lake, so it shouldn't be much longer," AJ said, and Eve's mind went about calculating how long not much longer could take. "But the doctor wanted an update. I'll let you talk to him." Eve blew the hair up out of her face as she waited for the phone transfer. "Eve?" Dr. Breeley asked. "What have we got going?" As concisely as she knew how, although she didn't know the exact language, Eve relayed what she knew. "We must be getting close then. We can't wait any longer," Dr. Breeley said in resignation when she had completed the update. "Okay, if she gets ready to push again, I need you to get ready to deliver this baby." Eve's breath caught. Towels, breathing, she could do those. But delivering a baby? That was far beyond her realm of comfort or knowledge. The rational part of her brain wanted to protest, but before she could, the doctor started going through the procedure, and the protests vanished into concentrating on his instructions. "You got all that?" he finally asked when her mind had spun completely away from her on all of the information. "Yeah, I think so," she said as Lisa curled forward again. Struggling to focus on 3 things at once, Eve put the phone to her other ear and bent to comfort her friend. "Could I talk to AJ again?" "Sure," Dr. Breeley said. She breathed through the thoughts of the coming minutes. "AJ here," he said with worry, but firmly. "You're going to be here as soon as you can, right?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm and level. "You know I will." This has been White Knight, Book 2, The Courage Series, written by Staci Stallings, narrated by Becky Dowdy. Copyright 2012 by Staci Stallings. Production copyright 2014 by Staci Stallings.
You don't want to miss what comes next. Like and subscribe to the Staci Stallings YouTube channel so you never miss a second of the story.